The morning I found out my car had been taken from my own driveway, I didn't get angry right away. I just stood there holding my coffee, staring at the empty space where my silver sedan had been parked every single night for the last 6 years, trying to convince myself there had to be some simple explanation. Maybe I had forgotten where I left it. Maybe a family member moved it. Maybe I was still half asleep and my brain was playing tricks on me. But then I saw the yellow notice taped to my front door, and that little piece of paper changed everything. My car wasn't stolen. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't towed because of a police emergency or some city violation. It had been removed because my homeowners association decided that a vehicle sitting on my own driveway was somehow breaking their rules. And the strangest part was, they weren't embarrassed about it. They genuinely believed they had the authority to do whatever they wanted. I lived in a quiet neighborhood called Red Canyon Vista, a planned community on the edge of Mesa, Arizona, where most people moved because they wanted a peaceful place to settle down. The houses all looked similar from the outside, with warm stucco walls, desert plants, gravel yards, and small driveways designed for the Arizona heat. It wasn't a fancy gated community with celebrities hiding behind giant walls. It was just regular people, teachers, retirees, office workers, families raising kids. The kind of neighborhood where people waved when they passed each other and borrowed tools from the garage next door. I bought my house because I wanted exactly that kind of life. After years of dealing with crowded apartments and noisy neighbors, I wanted somewhere calm, somewhere predictable, somewhere I could come home after work and feel like I was finally in control of my own space. For 6 years, that was exactly what I had. I worked from home, which meant my routine was pretty simple. I would wake up early, make coffee, sit at my desk, answer emails, and usually spend most of the day without even starting my car. My silver sedan became almost like a piece of driveway furniture. It was there every morning, every evening, and nobody cared. My neighbors knew my habits. They knew I wasn't leaving an abandoned vehicle outside. They knew I wasn't blocking anyone. The car was parked completely inside my property line, exactly where my driveway was built for it to be. Honestly, the most exciting thing that happened around my house before all of this was probably when my neighbor's dog escaped and spent 20 minutes chasing a delivery truck down the street. That was the level of drama we had. Then everything changed when the HOA decided they wanted a fresh start. Our old management company was replaced in the spring, and with the new company came a new board president named Victor Halstead. Victor was a retired insurance executive, and he had the kind of personality where every casual conversation somehow sounded like a business meeting. He wasn't loud. He wasn't rude. That would have been easier. Instead, he was polite in a way that made you feel like you were already being reviewed. Every email from him looked like it had been written by someone preparing evidence for a courtroom. No, "Hey neighbors." No, "Hope everyone is doing well." Just policy numbers, deadlines, and reminders about compliance. His favorite word was compliance. I remember the first time I saw his email signature. It said, Victor Halstead, Community Standards Enforcement. I actually laughed because I thought it was a joke. I showed it to my neighbor Carl, who lived 2 houses down, and I said, "Do you think he has a badge somewhere? Or does he just feel important without one?" Carl laughed and said, "Give him a month. They'll probably start inspecting our mailboxes for suspicious behavior." At the time, it was funny. Looking back, we should have realized that Victor wasn't trying to be funny. He actually saw himself as the person responsible for keeping everyone in line. Within a few weeks, the tone of the neighborhood started changing. Small reminders became official notices. Friendly conversations became formal warnings. Victor started talking about protecting property values and restoring order, which sounded reasonable when you heard it quickly. Nobody wants a neighborhood that looks neglected. Nobody wants rules ignored completely. But there was something different about the way he approached things. It wasn't really about protecting the community. It felt like he enjoyed having the final word. He liked being the person who could send an email and make everyone stop what they were doing to check whether they had accidentally violated some rule they didn't even know existed. Most people ignored it at first. They figured it was just a new president trying too hard. I did too. I thought eventually he would calm down once the excitement wore off. But then came the morning in July. It was already hot before sunrise. The kind of Arizona morning where you step outside and immediately feel the heat waiting for you. I walked out with my coffee, wearing my old work shirt, thinking about the meetings I had scheduled that day. I looked toward my driveway and stopped. My car was gone. I wish I could say I immediately knew what happened, but I didn't. I just stood there. The driveway looked wrong. empty, almost like someone had edited my house and forgotten to put my car back. I walked closer, looking around the street. Nothing. No car. No note from a neighbor. No police paperwork. Just a faint tire mark on the concrete and a yellow paper attached to my door. I picked it up and read it. Vehicle removed pursuant to overnight parking restriction under Section 7.3. I read the sentence again because something about it felt strange. I knew my HOA documents. I had kept a printed copy from when I purchased the house. I knew there were rules about street parking, guest parking, and community areas, but I had never seen anything that allowed them to remove a vehicle from a private driveway. I immediately called the towing company listed on the notice. The woman who answered sounded like someone who had already explained the same situation several times that morning. The vehicle was removed at the request of your homeowners association, she said. I asked, removed from where exactly? She replied, from the location provided by the association. I looked out my window at my empty driveway and said, the location was my own property. There was a pause. Then she said the sentence I would hear over and over during the next few weeks. You'll need to discuss that with your HOA. That answer bothered me more than I expected, because it meant nobody was questioning whether it was right. The towing company had a request. The HOA had made a decision, and somehow I was the only person standing there asking if any of it was actually legal. I called the property manager next. She explained that vehicles could not remain parked in driveways longer than 72 hours according to board enforcement guidelines. I asked a simple question. When was that rule approved? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, the board has authority to interpret community parking standards. That was the moment I realized something important. They weren't telling me where the rule was. They were telling me they had the power to decide what the rule meant. Later that afternoon, Victor emailed me personally. His message was exactly what I expected. Calm, professional, cold. He explained that the board acted within its authority and that all actions were taken to preserve community standards. I responded with one question. Can you provide the exact section of the recorded bylaws that allows the HOA to tow a vehicle from a privately owned driveway without prior notice? His response came quickly. The board is empowered to interpret and enforce regulations as necessary. I stared at those words for a long time, because something about them bothered me. A rule is supposed to tell people what they can and cannot do, but this wasn't a rule. This was someone saying, trust us, we know what the rule should be. That night, instead of arguing with Victor, I opened my HOA documents. I sat at my kitchen table with a highlighter, a notebook, and the same coffee mug that had been in my hand when I discovered my car was gone. I started reading every page carefully, and after about an hour, I found Section 7.3, the section they used to justify towing my car, except it didn't say what they claimed it said. Not even close. It was about overnight street parking restrictions during maintenance periods. It talked about public areas and road access. It never mentioned private driveways. It never gave the HOA permission to remove a homeowner's vehicle from their own property. And as I kept reading, I started realizing something bigger. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't just an employee making a mistake. Someone had taken a rule, stretched it beyond recognition, and hoped nobody would bother checking the original words. And sitting there alone at my kitchen table that night, I knew I had a decision to make. I could pay the towing bill, get my car back, and pretend nothing happened. Or I could challenge the people who thought a printed notice was enough to give them unlimited power over my home. I closed the binder, looked out at my empty driveway, and made my choice. I was going to make them prove they had the right to do what they did, and if they couldn't, I was going to use their own rules against them. The next morning, I could have done what most people probably would have done. I could have paid the towing bill, complained to a few neighbors, and moved on. After all, it was just a car, right? That was probably what Victor Halstead and the HOA board expected. They probably knew most homeowners don't have the time or energy to challenge every decision made by a board. People have jobs, families, bills, and 100 other things pulling their attention every day. Sometimes the easiest choice is simply letting something go. But the more I thought about what happened, the harder it became to ignore. The issue wasn't the car. The issue was that someone had decided they could take action against my property without showing me where that power actually came from. So, instead of arguing, I started documenting everything. I placed the yellow notice, the towing receipt, and every email from the HOA into a folder. I took pictures of my driveway from every angle, showing exactly where the vehicle had been parked. There was no question. The car wasn't blocking the sidewalk. It wasn't on the street. It wasn't parked on community property. It was sitting exactly where my driveway was designed for it to sit. That evening, my wife Sarah watched me sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. She smiled and said, "You know, most people use their dining table for dinner, not a neighborhood investigation." I laughed because she was right. Normally, I avoided paperwork whenever possible, but this felt different. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for answers. I opened the HOA documents from when I bought the house and started reading carefully. At first, I actually hoped I would find something that proved me wrong. I hoped there was some rule I had missed, some clause that explained everything. Because if there was, then at least this would just be a misunderstanding. But after reading through the parking sections, I found the opposite. The rule Victor used, Section 7.3, did exist, but it did not say what he claimed it said. It was about overnight street parking restrictions and temporary access issues in shared areas. It gave the HOA authority over community spaces, not private driveways. My driveway was part of my property. My car was on my property. The rule simply did not apply. I sat there staring at the page for a few minutes because that was the moment everything became clear. They weren't enforcing a rule. They were stretching one. And there was a big difference between those two things. I decided to go one step further. I checked the official county records to make sure I was looking at the correct governing documents. I didn't want to walk into a meeting with an argument based only on my own interpretation. I wanted facts. When the documents arrived, they confirmed what I had already suspected. The HOA had authority over certain community standards, but that authority had limits. They couldn't just create power where none existed. I also researched Arizona towing requirements because I wanted to know whether the removal process itself was handled correctly. What I found made the situation even worse. There were procedures designed to protect homeowners. There needed to be proper notice. There needed to be documentation. There needed to be a clear reason for removal. None of that happened. They didn't warn me. They didn't give me an opportunity to respond. They didn't schedule a hearing before taking action. They simply sent a truck and left a note on my door. At that point, I stopped thinking about getting my towing fee back. This had become something bigger. I kept thinking about the other homeowners in the neighborhood. How many people had received a violation notice and assumed the HOA must be right? How many people had paid fines because they didn't have the time to search through hundreds of pages of documents? Rules only have power because people believe they are legitimate, but if nobody checks them, even a mistake can start looking like authority. I wrote a formal letter to the HOA board. I was very careful with my words. I didn't insult Victor. I didn't accuse anyone of bad intentions. I simply explained the facts. I stated that my vehicle had been parked entirely on private property, that the cited rule did not authorize removal, and that the proper procedures had not been followed. I requested reimbursement for the towing costs and asked for a formal hearing. Before sending it, Sarah read the letter and said, "This sounds exactly like you." I looked at her and asked, "Is that good or bad?" She smiled. "Good. You're angry, but you don't sound angry. That's usually when people have the strongest argument." I sent the letter by certified mail and waited. The first week passed with no response. The second week passed. Then the third. The management company confirmed they received my request, but nothing else happened. That silence told me a lot. They weren't explaining their decision because they knew the explanation was weak, but they also weren't admitting they were wrong because nobody wanted to be the person who signed off on a bad decision. Eventually, I received a notice that the hearing would be held at the community clubhouse in late August. I remember reading the date and feeling something unexpected. Relief. Not because I wanted a confrontation, but because I finally had a place where everything could be put on the record. On the night of the hearing, I walked into the clubhouse carrying a folder full of documents. Victor was already sitting at the front table with the other board members. The room looked exactly like every HOA meeting room you've ever seen. Folding chairs, bright fluorescent lights, a stack of papers, a bowl of candy nobody touched. It was almost funny that such a serious argument was happening in a room that looked like it hosted retirement meetings and neighborhood announcements. Victor looked confident. He opened the meeting by explaining that the board had a responsibility to maintain community standards. He talked about protecting property values and ensuring consistency. I listened quietly because I had heard those words before, but this time, I had something more important than an opinion. I had documents. When it was my turn, I opened my folder and placed the rule they had cited on the table. Then I placed the actual wording of the rule beside it. "This is the section you used to remove my vehicle," I said. "And this is what that section actually covers." The room became quiet. I explained that the rule applied to street parking, not private driveways. I showed them photographs proving my car had been completely within my property line. I showed the towing notice. I showed the receipt. Then I said the one thing I wanted them to understand. The problem isn't that you interpreted the rule differently. The problem is that you acted as if your interpretation gave you unlimited authority. For the first time since this started, Victor didn't immediately have an answer. He looked down at the paperwork. A representative from the management company began reviewing the documents carefully. She flipped through the pages, compared the notice, and then quietly said, "It appears there may have been an issue with the required procedure." It was only one sentence, but it changed the entire room, because for the first time, someone from their side acknowledged that something had gone wrong. Victor said the board would review the matter and provide a decision after further discussion. The meeting ended without a final answer, but I walked out knowing something had changed. They no longer controlled the conversation. The question was no longer whether I understood the rule. The question was whether they had followed it, and now they had to answer for that. Part 2. Yamu Kasuviyang Tu Te Part 3. A few weeks after everything was settled, I noticed something interesting about the neighborhood. The driveway next door looked the same. The streets looked the same. The houses looked the same. Nothing about Red Canyon Vista suddenly became different because of one HOA decision, but the feeling had changed. People started talking again, not about the towing incident itself, but about the questions it raised. Neighbors who had ignored previous notices started reading them carefully. People began asking, where does this rule actually come from? And can they really do that? And honestly, I think that was the biggest change of all. It wasn't that the HOA lost power. It was that people remembered they had a voice too. A month earlier, Victor Halstead walked into that clubhouse believing the matter was simple. He had a position. He had a title. He had a board behind him. But what he didn't have was something more important, the actual authority to do what he did. And once that was exposed, the entire situation changed. My car eventually returned to the exact same spot where it had always been parked, the same driveway, the same concrete, the same quiet corner of my property. But every morning when I saw it sitting there, I was reminded of something bigger than a vehicle. I was reminded that rules are only fair when they apply equally to everyone, including the people who enforce them. I never wanted to fight with my HOA. I never woke up one morning thinking, today sounds like a good day to challenge my community board. I just wanted to live my life, park my car, and drink my coffee without wondering if someone was going to redefine the rules while I wasn't looking. But sometimes the biggest conflicts don't start because someone wants trouble. Sometimes they start because someone refuses to quietly accept something that feels wrong. And maybe that's the lesson I took away from all of this. Don't assume someone is right just because they sound official. Don't assume a rule exists just because someone confidently quotes a number. And don't underestimate the power of simply reading the words for yourself. Because in my case, the HOA didn't lose because I had more power than them. They didn't lose because I had a bigger title or more influence. They lost because they counted on nobody checking. They counted on people being too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to ask a simple question. Show me where it says that. And sometimes, that question is enough to change everything. So I want to hear what you think. Was the HOA president just trying to enforce community standards, or did he cross the line by using a rule that didn't actually apply? If you were in my situation, would you have fought it, or would you have just paid the towing bill and moved on? Share your thoughts in the comments because these kinds of neighborhood battles are never as simple as they look from the outside. Sometimes it's about a car. Sometimes it's about a fence, a yard, or a parking space. But underneath all of it, it's really about one thing: knowing where someone else's authority ends and where your own rights begin. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more real-life community conflicts and unexpected victories, and share this with someone who believes that knowing the rules is sometimes the strongest tool you can have.